In August of this year, the first TCR cell therapy to be approved for use in the U.S. was greenlighted by the FDA for patients with resectable or metastatic synovial sarcoma who have previously received chemotherapy. It marked the first new treatment for those patients in more than a decade, so it was a win for those patients and a win for Adrian Rawcliffe, who's had a hand on the wheel at Adaptimmune, the therapy's developer and manufacturer, since he joined the company as CFO in 2015 and subsequently stepped into the CEO's office in 2019. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and on today's episode, we're getting to know Adrian and why he's all in on cell therapies and how he's applying a solid track record in finance and business development to make good on the promises those cell therapies offer. Adrian, welcome to the Business of Biotech.
Delighted to be here, Matt.
I'm delighted to have you. And congratulations, by the way. It was just, so we're recording here in September for the benefit of our audience. This episode probably won't drop until sometime in October, late October, maybe. I'm not real sure just off the top of my head, but the approval just happened in August. So exciting news for Adaptimmune, and congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's fantastic news for us. Yeah, fantastic news for us, fantastic news for patients, fantastic news for the cell therapy field, all of those things. And we're excited. And as you might imagine, just absolutely focused on launching at the moment.
Yeah. I want to start out by getting some background on you. Like, I want to rewind and kind of discover what makes you tick, because, as we often do, we do a little bit of snooping and stalking on our guests. And, you're on paper, you're a finance guy through and through. You're a chartered accountant. You've got a PwC pedigree. You've served in roles including president at SR1 Capital. SR1's been on the show before. You were VP of finance at GSK. What sort of prompted this move into biotech leadership, and more specifically that of a cell therapy company? Tell me a little bit about that. How do you go from being a PwC accountant to someone who dives headfirst into the life sciences space?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that there's a nice linear path, but I tend to be quite distrustful of people who claim linear paths to their careers. My first love was science. I went to university to read chemistry. I decided quite early on that I didn't really like chemistry. I switched to read natural sciences, which is a more broad-based degree. I did a lot of molecular biology, biochemistry, biology in that, and then at the end of that, there's a choice, and maybe I should have realized that I'm a generalist by nature. I'm not sure I did realize that at the time, but the choice was between, specialization in a field of science. My third year thesis was on higher plant phosphatases, which is a really boring group of plant enzymes that are incredibly commercially interesting, but not particularly scientifically interesting. And I really didn't want to spend the next 4 years focusing on that. And this was early 90s, and there was a recession in the UK, and there weren't that many people who were hiring, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went and I joined PwC, or Cooper's and Lybrand at that point in time. And part of the reason was, well, it's another opportunity to get a broad-based education in something, to further decision about what to do for a while, probably. And it seemed like an attractive route to take. I don't think many people would classify me as a classic accountant. But interestingly, in the UK, it's slightly different to the US, because in the UK, those firms will take people with any degree. You don't have to have decided at age 15 you wanted to be a CPA or an accountant. You could, like me, decide that that's something to do when you're 21 and having completed a degree in something else. So I did that for a few years, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's foundational, that lens and slant on how to analyze the finances of a business. But then I by strange serendipity came across an advertisement in a paper for a job as it turned out it was at Glaxo Wellcome. And I decided this was a good fit for me, and I went. And I had no experience of the pharma industry at that point in time. And I think not many 26-year-olds, as I was then, really do unless they've been very unfortunate. And so I joined into a finance group, but it was a deal finance group, and that's the other thing that's sort of interesting about my career at GSK. Although some of the roles are financially oriented, very few of them were sort of like classic finance roles until
Crunching numbers, right?
It wasn't really until I got to CFO of North America about a decade later that I actually had a sort of classical finance role. Most of the stuff in between was transactional. It was business development. It was running SR1, GSK's venture fund, and so those roles on the interface of science and business, which I think are incredibly interesting. They're sort of scattered around companies like GSK, but they're fascinating roles because they sort of urge you to apply the finance to the finance business side to the science, but they also require at least some understanding of how you drive value out of science, and that was sort of essential in the most of the roles that I had at that point, which were really transactional, leading up to running worldwide business development immediately before I shifted over to be CFO of North America.
Yeah. So, at SR1, did you work with Simeon George, or was he was he after you?
Yeah, no, I hired Simeon.
So you hired Simeon, okay.
Simeon joined around the time that I did, great little team, and that I'm really happy with the success story of SR1. 30 years at GSK, and then the sort of spin out and the subsequent success that they've enjoyed. It's a testament to the need for the opportunity for industry-focused venture capital to be effective over the long term.
Yeah. Simeon was my guest a couple episodes ago. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but you'll have to check that out. Fantastic interview, fantastic man. So I want to pick your brain a little bit about this sort of, I guess, rationalization of risk tolerance and financial responsibility. It kind of opens up that can of worms, right? You've got this long history and a proven history of being able to analyze deal making, the business transactions for a big company like GSK, lots of resources. Cell therapy comes along, and I don't want to fast forward. We can kind of go forward in reverse here as much as we want. So I don't want to fast forward too quick, but you joined Adaptimmune in 2015 as CFO, and you did that for a specific reason, as I understand it, because you were bullish on cell therapy. How does Adrian Rawcliffe get to that point where, I've been responsible with a lot of people's big money for quite some time, and now I have this opportunity to move into a field that at the time, 2015, like there's a high degree of risk making that move. I don't know, just what was going on. Give us a picture of what was going on in your brain at the time and how you rationalized that, the embrace of that risk.
Yeah. I think there were sort of three fairly distinct reasons why I joined Adaptimmune at that point. One was, just really simplistically, I was bored. I'd been CFO of the US business for 4 years, and it sounds strange to say it, and my managers and leaders at the time were like, well, it's a really important job, and I was like, yeah, but it's not actually that interesting. And it wasn't giving me the intellectual stimulation that I needed to be successful. And I didn't think I'm not a particularly good maintainer. I'm a good builder, but I'm not a good maintainer. And so that was one. And then the second piece was, a strategic decision, a couple of strategic decisions that GSK made. And don't get me wrong, I think very highly of my time at GSK and of the company. And for reasons that I completely understand, they made two decisions. They got out of neurodegeneration research, and they got out of oncology. And the second one, they did a big transaction that involved them giving their oncology to Novartis. And it was a great transaction for GSK. I don't think it was a bad deal, but it did mean that they got out of those two spaces. And I was sitting there going, well, what do we care about in the Western Hemisphere, which is the place that actually pays for most of the pharmaceutical R&D to happen in one way or another? I think those are the two things that, if you ask anybody on the street, they would say, "What's your biggest fear, health fear?" They would say,
Yeah.
cancer or Alzheimer's or your brain going. Now they probably should say cardiovascular disease and obesity and all this other stuff, but those are two big fears, and so. GSK getting out of them, I was just like, what are we doing? And I got to the point in my career where I was like, okay, I want to be doing something that is very significant contribution to human health. What do I know? Well, I've looked at 1,000 biotech companies. I've done diligence on hundreds of them over the time that I was running BD or bits of BD or SR1. And suddenly there's this field of cell therapy that's out there that's starting to get to prime time. And it strikes me that this is sort of similar to what happened with protein therapeutics 20 years previously. That this is a new modality of therapy, that this is a significantly different way of treating patients that would come with a whole set of opportunities and risks and challenges, but that if it worked, and that was still a fairly big if this worked, then you change the world. You don't just change an individual patient's life or an individual therapy. This isn't one drug. This is something where if this works, we transform how cancer is treated and our relationship as a species with cancer. We have the opportunity to do that, and I think I still believe cell therapy has that opportunity. And so looking at that, it was clear that a lot of the interest in that space at that time, but still the case, is in the hematological malignancies, in blood cancers. So the CAR T therapies were really big. And that's great. And those have completely transformed that space. But the solid tumor space, the cancers that everybody recognizes that don't have confusing acronyms, that are named after major organs, those things, it has struggled to be addressed with the CAR T, and yet here was this company, here was this thing, this way of approaching these with Adaptimmune that was applicable to these solid tumors. And again, if it works, it's huge. So when you think about risk, it's difficult to think about risk without thinking about the opportunity. And at that point in time, and I still believe this to be the case, the opportunity in solid tumors with cell therapy is so enormous and so fundamental that yes, there is a high risk that goes with it, but that is offset by orders of magnitude by the opportunity if we can get that right. In the same way that monoclonal antibodies were for biopharmaceuticals back in the day. I mean, I was at GSK from sort of 98 through to the early 2000s period when all the companies, large pharma companies, were thinking about, do I get into biopharm? If you'd told almost any company then that 7 of the top 10 selling pharmaceuticals would be biopharmaceuticals in 20 years' time, I don't think they'd have believed you. And the number one selling product in the entire world would be a biopharm, would be Humira. I don't think people would have recognized that at the time. And so I think that the opportunity in cell therapy is at least as significant as that in monoclonals or
biopharm. That opportunity and sort of that analogy, it's intriguing because you said you don't think people would have believed it at the time that a biologic would be the biggest selling therapy in the world, and they wouldn't have believed it at the time. Well, you tell me why. Like, why wouldn't they have believed it? You tell me before I tell you what I think. You tell me why not.
I'm very interested in what you think. My perception is that we get stuck in paradigms, and the practitioners of that paradigm have a great deal of difficulty in understanding the succeeding paradigm. And the succeeding paradigm is rarely replacing the previous paradigm. It usually just adds to it in therapy.
Yeah.
So if you think about small molecules, all the practitioners of making small molecules were focused on the benefits of small molecule, and their entire organization was set up to realize those benefits. And then we've sort of convinced ourselves that those benefits trumped other things. So, for example, well, patients like pills, they don't like injections. Yeah. So you come along with an injection and patients, the less value given to, the interval between doses. A real understanding of small molecules and how they interact and the positive elements of those makes you less inclined to really believe the benefits of protein-protein interactions that you might get from biopharms. And so you downplay in your mindset of I'm a small molecule drug developer, you downplay all the things that make biopharms important. Critically, it's those things that make biopharms distinct that actually deliver the benefits and the risks of that new modality of therapy. So every time a new modality comes along, it has certain inherent features to it. In biopharm terms, it's sort of, it's almost always going to be injectable. Yes, people have talked about oral biopharmaceuticals, but the vast majority are going to be injectable. They're going to have a long time in situ. Their half-life is measured in usually weeks or months, not in hours or days. They are capable of exquisitely tight binding to a target because that's how the protein has evolved in order to deliver that. And so there are a set of properties that then confer. Then, if you leverage those in development, you can confer clinical benefit to a patient from that. And those are going to be fundamentally different to the clinical benefit that you get from a small molecule because of the intrinsic nature of that modality. And so I think when people were turning up, you can imagine I've got a brand new biotech company full of protein engineers turning up to talk to a medicinal chemist about at a large pharmaceutical company about drug development and well, why couldn't I just drug that with a small molecule, and how much are you going to charge for that? And none of those questions are convincing for the people who live in the previous paradigm. So I think that's why.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with all that. I guess I would add to the conversation. I mean, one of the whys is the complexity, right? Like we're at a point now where antibody manufacturing. I'm not going to discredit antibody manufacturers. I mean, and we're seeing such incremental improvement to antibodies, bispecifics, and what we're doing with ADCs now. Like they're supremely complex. At the time, that was the case. That's where we are with cell therapy right now. It's an incredibly complex paradigm, and I think that there's. I don't want your opinion on this. I think that there's often the misperception that the value of the company is in the final product, and that's not the case in biotech. Certainly not in cell and gene therapy right now, where we're developing the systems, processes, equipment, to make the values there, right? Like at this point, I mean, obviously there's great value in a product like the one that you just had approved, Tecelera, that, has clinical benefit that we haven't seen in a long time and is stepping in where we haven't seen advances in 10 years. But Adaptimmune was valuable before that approval. So I'm interested in your perspective on that. Like, as you look at the way that the cell therapy space is playing out, the development of the capabilities and processes and equipment, how does that relate to the valuation that we're putting on all these cell therapy companies that are popping up?
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, and I think the starting point for me is that if you think about how pharmaceutical companies and biopharmaceutical companies create value, you think any large pharma company. Once upon a time, they weren't very large. Incidentally, once upon a time, they were a lot smaller, and they became successful because they captured sometimes a particular technology, but much more often than a particular technology, is they managed to find a way of integrating multiple technologies along a value creation chain that starts with target identification and goes through, identifying the right compounds and then testing those compounds in vitro, in vivo, and then being able to make them and then being able to do the clinical trials effectively and assess the patients effectively. So there's all sorts of technology around that in translational technologies, etc. And then ultimately be able to bring that to market, file a regulatory file, which takes a specific set of knowledge associated with that. And I would argue that actually the individual components of those technologies have a certain value, but what pharma managed to get right was the integration of all those technologies into capabilities to say, well, this isn't just a technology play. This is, I can develop this medicine. I can discover a new drug against a target. So that's the integration of a lot of technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as new modalities play out, and you think about this for biopharmaceuticals versus small molecules, you think about it for oligonucleotides, and now I think about it for cell therapy, cell and gene therapy. As these new modalities play out, I think one of the interesting things is that the integration, those technologies might differ and the integration of them differs. So the capabilities that you're building from the integration of these technologies and people and processes, etc., look very different for a cell therapy company than they do for a small molecule company. And as the new modality is developed, and we're the first solid tumor. There's a few CARs out there. There's some TILs coming through as well. All different types of cell therapies. As those therapies get developed, those capabilities get framed up properly and built by the companies that are trying to do them. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're all internal. They can be outsourced as well, depending on the maturity of the market. Mm-hmm. But those technologies, the integration of those technologies into capabilities is critical. And for cell therapy, those capabilities look very different to the capabilities for a small molecule. And I think they have intrinsic value. But they really only have intrinsic value because they enable you to develop products through them. Ultimately, the real value creation point in this industry is when a patient goes to a doctor, the doctor prescribes a medicine or a treatment, and the patient receives that treatment. The patient gets value, benefit from that, and somebody pays for it. That's the value creation point. And so the reason I think these capabilities are valuable is because they enable you to develop those products. I don't think you can develop cell therapy products without cell therapy development, discovery, development, and delivery capabilities.
Yeah. And Adaptimmune has developed those capabilities internally and is in fact manufacturing T-Cellra internally, correct?
Yes, we are.
So
above me here in the Navy Yard.
Yeah, right above you there. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. So you joined the company in 2015 as chief financial officer, as I said, CEO in 2019. What went into this decision to internalize the development of these capabilities that you speak of? And I mean, we look at, we've been referring to antibodies. Like, I don't know that there's outside of like big pharma, and maybe some mid and larger size players. I don't know that there's a single antibody development company out there that's going, oh yeah, we completely want to put a shovel in the ground and build, brick and mortar facilities. Although, who knows, with the Biosecure Act, that could be changing. There's some outside influences that are maybe going to mess with that. Cell therapy, I know it's different. Like, I know that a lot more of this stuff is internalized, but as CFO of the company, go back to those days, the CFO of the company, at that stage in the therapeutics development, what went into that decision-making process around, building versus buying?
So starting point, fundamentally, what are you trying to do? Define a strategy, align resources around that strategy very tightly, and then execute on it. So if you think about that question's really a why. Why is it strategically critical to build cell therapy manufacturing in-house? Because if you accept that it is, then it's a fairly simple decision to finance it. And I think there's a number of reasons why we think that is. One, the market was and still remains pretty immature, actually, in terms of an external market to go and source those capabilities for. And yeah, that is actually similar to how it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, first decade of this century, for biopharm companies. So, if you look at that generation of biopharm companies, the ones who successfully brought product to market, most of them did make the decision to invest in biopharm manufacturing. And they then subsequently also made the decision to sell that biopharm manufacturing and lease it back, or to actually not build the next plant and get subcontract that from somebody in usually a lower cost jurisdiction as well. And so I think that's because over that time period, the market matured, but also, and this is the sort of second reason why doing this in-house at the moment makes sense. The technology became essentially commoditized, commoditized and transparent. So one of the things that is a key challenge in the cell therapy space is, and I'm going to state as a definitive statement what is actually a graduated statement, but we don't really know why cell therapies work in some patients and don't work in other patients. The complexity that you referred to earlier about is inherent to the product, and it's probably why the product is effective, or a large part of it is why the product is effective. So you think about the cells here. We call these things CD19 CAR T cells, or for T-cellular, we say that it's a MAGE-A4 targeting T cell, TCR T cell. But in reality, that's because we call it that because that's the bit that we changed. That's the bit we edited, and we inserted new gene in to get it to do that. In reality, that cell is doing 150,000 other things all at the same time. And those other things are quite important when it comes to what the efficacy is. And so you can change what that cell does genetically by inserting new genes in, CARs or enhanced TCRs. And you can insert other genes as well to get it to do other specific things. But you can also change how that cell performs by how you make it, and in a way that is orders of magnitude more important than it is for glycosylation patterns on monoclonal antibodies. Yeah. And so the manufacturing of cell therapies defines, it's not just that it defines that this product is that thing, that T-cell, it actually defines the efficacy and the safety of that product. And so as we think about that, if we don't understand how that really works, and yet there's so much knowledge to be gained about what an effective cell looks like and how you can define that through the manufacturing process, it was key to us from an early stage that we had to have control of that, because it doesn't just enable us to service patients on a patient-by-patient basis and everyone needs to be right. It also gives us incredibly valuable information about what constitutes a good cell therapy product that you feed back into your research organization, into your translational organization, and you change your GMP manufacturing to produce better product iteratively. And so therefore it goes from being something that is a means by which you produce your product to something that actually defines what your product is, and therefore is much more strategically important if you're interested in getting the best possible cell product over time. Yeah. So that's why we did it, and I I dread to think what would have been the situation if we had not had manufacturing in-house when we went to do the BLA with the FDA, because not having control of that would have been, I think, very problematic.
Was financing that initiative as simple as giving your stakeholders that profoundly eloquent justification that you just gave me? Was it that easy?
No, no, I don't think it was. And you know, to be clear, the first 8 years, 7 years of the company, we were using exclusively outsourced cell manufacturing. It was our experience with that, which was variable, and the starting of being able to finance the company properly that made us make that shift. The one of the sort of pivots was in 2014, we did our first major financing as a company. We'd previously been financed by in the UK by high net worth individuals in the UK. We did our first proper financing, private round, and then 6 months later we went public. And that private round brought in OrbiMed and NEA and some new board members, many of whom had experience with biopharms. And there was a discussion at the very first board meeting after that, which is we have to be a manufacturing tower of strength if we are going to be successful developing this pipeline. So that combined with the ability to pay for it, the financing, private and then public, was what sort of triggered that investment in this facility.
Yeah. What are you seeing in this space now in terms of the appetite for internal manufacturing investment? Is it changing at all? I mean, do you see it like is it changing one way or the other? Like is it becoming more acceptable to say, hey, we need more money because we need to, own this process development, this manufacturing capability, or is it going the other way because we're starting to see some maturation of the technology and some, better equipped outsourcers pop up?
Yeah. I think both things are true. I think that they're both the field is expanding. I think the autologous cell therapy field is expanding. I think there are now much more mature, credible third-party CDMOs, including those that will take your process from very early stages and sort of provide that sort of outsourced process development and manufacture sort of in one flow in a way that is suitable for cell therapies, which meets the requirements of autologous cell therapy. So I think that does now exist. However, I do think people are very definitely now looking though at the fact that if you want to be commercial, then you have to think about, well, obviously doing at least your pivotal trial out of the same manufacturing facility that you want to commercialize out of, and possibly even you want to go before that. And so there is I think there's also an increasing understanding that continuity of that manufacturing makes sense. So if you can afford to build that out yourself, if you have a pipeline, then I think there are companies like Iovance across the road from us here who have gone that route. Autolus is another one that's investing in internal manufacturing. And so I do think there is the opportunity to still support manufacturing for significant products. The pipeline discussion is important though, because these things only really work at some level of scale.
Yeah.
And so if you only have one product, and you don't have the need for that iteration that I talked about, because you're never going to have another product, and then actually outsourcing might be a very credible way of doing this. And I think it is starting to be feasible. I think it will take another 15 years, 10 to 15 years before we're in the same position as the biopharm industry is now in, where you wouldn't even think about building in-house unless you were a very, very large company with a very, very large product.
Yeah. Is there a this is totally question, maybe totally out of left field. I'm just curious. Is there a sort of a de facto, like a not de facto, but like an attitude du jour specific to the industry that you're in terms of, you know, you just talked about, like, if you want to go commercial, like this is a logical way to go. You know, in so much of biologics and so much of the biopharmaceutical space, biotech,
Yeah.
you know, smaller companies, you know, commercialization's like it's either a pipe dream or it's like, you know, way down the radar. It's like a lot of stuff's going to happen between now and phase
Yep.
3. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
and some of that stuff we'll be happy to embrace and shop and put up for sale and move it around. Is it the same in cell therapy? We don't cover as many cell therapy companies on the Business of Biotech as we do, you know, antibodies and ADCs and vaccines and that kind of thing. Is it the same there, or is there more sort of you know, when you look around at the landscape, is there more sort of an attitude like, hey, you know, we've got this very proprietary approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about that transparency of technology and how that kind of juxtaposes with proprietary and differentiated processes. But back to the question, is there sort of this attitude like, hey, a lot of companies want to be a company that, you know, sees therapeutic candidates through to commercialization, cell therapy, versus, you know, just kind of building a business for saleable value.
Yeah. I think there's still exploration of what the right business model is for cell therapies. I think if there is an accepted wisdom in the space, it would be that if you want to be in cell therapy at this point in time, you've got to be all in on cell therapy. You've got to have that in a model that lives and breathes cell therapy, and is not distracted or challenged by other needs. Now, that is possible to do in a large organization. Yeah, I'd say the Kite-Gilead relationship is a good example. I'm sure that other companies have managed to work out how to organize themselves to bring that focus on cell therapy. But it also means that there's a large number of companies who have not gone all in on cell therapy yet, in the same way that large companies didn't go all in on monoclonal antibodies till the mid-noughties. And therefore, I think that it's difficult to sort of think about, well, you know, you could just take a cell therapy and put it in your normal business. For as long as that exists, as long as this requires a sort of unique focus, there is an opportunity, I think, for companies like Adaptimmune, like Iovance, like Autolus that are wholly dedicated to cell therapies to say, look, actually, the most important thing to be successful here isn't actually scale. It isn't actually global reach or footprint. The most important thing is specificity, is focus on being a cell therapy company. And then the other complicating factor that just gets in the way when one thinks about commercializing is if you want the large part of the commercial story or the way that we make these medicines available is in the supply chain. You know, ultimately, this needs to come out of a hospital, out of a patient, into our facility, get engineered, go through our process, go back. And that is a large piece of the logistics that cell therapy companies are invest in order to make that successful. And and that attaches to the product and it attaches to the BLA. So where you manufacture this sort of is sticky. Now that doesn't mean that you couldn't have somebody commercializing who's separate to the manufacturing, but by and large, those two things being together makes a lot of sense too. So you put it together, and I think both models will work. Sale, and then somebody else does it, but they've got to be committed to cell therapy, and I think it's that's a subset of the biopharma universe that are.
Yeah. All right. I want to jump back to that transparency of technology conversation. You mentioned that. Did you coin the phrase? Is that yours?
No, old phrase going back to history of science.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but we don't want to equate it directly to commoditization, do we? They're related, but not like parallel.
I think so. I mean, the transparency of technology sort of refers to this sort of interesting phenomenon where the first time people are experimenting and they're on the sort of edge of knowledge, then because they don't always understand the parameters that are important, there's a tendency to describe experiments in a way that includes a whole load of extraneous information that over time we realize isn't important. And so, the often used example is if you go back and you read Newton's stuff on light, he goes into great lengths about where he bought his prism from and how he set it up and etc. to split white light into the rainbow. And then within 20 years, everyone was like, got prism, put in light, saw rainbow, and that was the experimental method. And the same thing happens at all these technologies. And I think it then goes along. It does go along with commoditization. It goes along with, well, if you do really understand it, then you can optimize it, then you can reduce it to practice, then anybody can do it.
Yeah. And so that's where I want to explore your thoughts on just for a minute. And I mean, maybe the continuum is so long and stretched out in front of us that it's not like a thing that keeps Adrian Rawcliffe awake at night, right? Like in my simple mind, I see conflict, I guess conflict or friction. There's tension, right? There's tension between the mastery of a quote unquote proprietary skill or technology or approach, and the desire to get to a point where, for the benefit of humanity, these things that we're building are, to your point, buy a prism, put it in the sun, get a rainbow.
Yep.
Do you ever contemplate this tension, or does it not necessarily concern you right now? Because as I said, maybe you and I will be long gone by the time the transparency is so great that or maybe we won't be because of the things that you're working on.
I mean, I think to an extent this is sort of a variation on the theme that the pharma industry sort of lives with all the time. The biopharma industry live with all the time, because essentially what we're talking about isn't that different to what happens with a drug going off patent. And we live with that, and it's actually part of the culture. In fact, there's a strong argument that says that actually the value that we are contributing to society, yes, we measure that in terms of newly approved launched drugs and the value that we can create from sales. But in reality, from a societal perspective, you're interested in when that drug goes off patent. And I think as an industry, we live with that, and we accept that our job is to bring that forward, understand it well enough to be able to reduce it to practice, get that registered, back that up with data that shows clinical benefit, get it registered, and then be able to monetize that for a period of time, and then it will go off patent, and we should logically accept that it goes off patent, because that's part of the contract we have with society.
We'll mark these words down when Tecelra goes off patent. We're going to revisit this with Adrian Rawcliffe and find out how he's feeling about it.
Well, I think the challenge with monoclonal antibodies, with these other technologies that have been produced, particularly where the manufacturing process is the product, defines the product.
Mm-hmm.
I think this has been shown to be more challenging. So there are some people who say there will never be generic cell therapies. And I tend to think that never is a long time. When any eminent scientist tells you that something's impossible, they're almost certainly wrong. Incidentally, it's just a question of time, resources, and if you think about the incentives, if cell therapy is, as I believe, one of the largest opportunities for value creation, then when Humira was approaching genericization, there are 20 billion reasons why people would like Humira to go generic. I think in the face of that, the industry once said there'll never be generic biopharms. No, there aren't generic biopharms. There are biosimilars. They perform the same function, not exactly the same, but they will over time, I think, make that democratize access to biopharmaceuticals. And the same will be true in some way of cell therapies. I don't have a clear angle on how exactly we need to evolve the regulatory world in order to do that. But I do think that it lies through the same things that I was talking about before, which is a better understanding of the relationship between the product and the manufacturing process and the outcomes. Because if you could know which were the salient features, the critical salient features, then you could define what it would take to produce a product. Maybe it's not exactly the same, because actually every patient's cells are different, but it would be essentially the same product, and then you could define a route through to approvability of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for indulging some of my more naive questions. I appreciate it. I want to jump back in the time that we have left. This time is going by very quickly with you, Adrian, as I knew it would, having the benefit of a conversation with you a couple of weeks ago. But I want to jump back. One of the questions that I get most frequently from young upstarts who are interested in biotech and pursuing it as a career, folks coming out of graduate school, perhaps, or people who are looking to kind of reverse course and join biotech from other industries, is the route of progression, right? Like, I want to get into biotech. What should I do? Should I be a science guy? Should I go be a finance guy? And you got this unique perspective because, like I said, I was classifying you as a chartered accountant and a CFO, but you've got the deal making experience. You've got the hard cold Excel spreadsheet experience, and also plenty of science experience. But I'm curious about how. It occurs to me that the financial chops that you've earned over the years would be like a great skill set to have in your current role. But then perhaps also there might be times where it's, sort of a drag to look at everything through the financial lens. So I want to jump back to that real quick and just kind of get your perspectives on where that financial and deal making experience has been like incredibly beneficial to you in your role as CEO at Adaptimmune, and perhaps maybe a little bit on where that experience, weighs you down or otherwise causes you, internal strife.
Yeah. I think my starting point is that I'm not sure anything is appropriate, any reasonable route is appropriate preparation for being CEO. And if you think about it, if you thought, okay, well, what are the areas I need to understand to be the CEO of a biotechnology company, and you thought about this from a acquisition of knowledge and skills perspective, you'd say, okay, I need to spend 5 years in each of the component areas. Okay, all of our CEOs would be 140, and I'm not sure they'd have the energy to be a CEO at that point in time. I think the question is, okay, which bits of this prepared me well? But where were the gaps? And I think most of those places I look at, not actually from a not actually from a skills and experience perspective, although that's clearly part of it, but from a sort of leadership perspective, because I think skills, particularly as CEO, you have the opportunity to build a team, and there's almost no set of skills that you can't find and have in your team. You don't need to have them all yourself by any stretch of the imagination. So then, what is it from that background that has been good, and what is it that from a leadership perspective, and where are the gaps? So I think the spaces where it was good for me was, I think business development and those transactional experiences, and including investing at SR1, etc., were exercises in integration, integrating disparate data and information to form a view and to make decisions and judgment, and very much not okay, these are the numbers, and this is what I'm going to do. Pulling it all together. And they're also, interestingly, I think the BD side was, if you think about, you go and you do, did 45 due diligences on very late stage assets that had completed phase 3. You go and do diligence on one of those, you get to see everything that's happened in the last decade of drug development in that asset. It's an amazing privilege, actually. You get to think, well, why did you make that decision, and how did you think about that clinical trial, and that one failed, what did you do? And you get to understand all of the correspondence with the FDA. So it's like living an entire decade of drug development in that drug. You can basically vicariously access what the people who led that drug development sort of experienced over that period of time. And so that's an amazing opportunity to get a breadth of knowledge about how different companies have made different decisions, and which turned out to be important and not. So I think all of that is sort of like, okay, exercises the sort of integrative thinking chops, and also I think speaks to the importance of those teams are teams that come together, break apart, come together, break apart. So building and effectively managing high-performing teams, often overused phrase, but towards objectives, is sort of that piece is also there. I think where it also speaks to some things that I have that are peculiar. I think I was successful and good at that because I have a pathological comfort with ambiguity. I off the spectrum. I am completely okay with, I don't know any of that, and I'm okay with all of that. And that's actually sort of a weakness actually when it comes to running much larger organizations, where a load of the people who work in that organization need a clear route forward, as opposed to a whole series of options. And so there's a bunch of stuff that helped me in that, and then there's a number of things that didn't, from a leadership perspective, that I had to build elsewhere. The last thing I'll say is, and this is, there's a lot that you can learn on the ground in biotech, and my exercise of the last 9 years has been just immense amount of learning from a leadership, organizational, science, business perspective. But the large pharmaceutical companies, I think large companies in general, run pretty effective leadership development for their people. And so I did have the opportunity to take advantage of some fairly structured and fairly, what I now understand. At the time, I'm not sure I really understood the value of this. Always, but now looking back, I'm like, I got access to some world-class leadership thinking that evolved me and was incredibly useful when I did step into this CEO role.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right. So in the time that we have left, which is very little, I want to maybe glean some insight from you around the approval. It's something
Yeah.
that, a lot of biotech CEOs maybe never get to experience. But when they do, like when you're moving into that experience and you're leading through it. And I know this is a it's a terrible one to end on because you could go really long on it. We'll
I'll
do it
try and
another
be
time. We'll do it
concise.
another time. We'll do it another time. We'll get into the whole, I mean, the clinical, I'd love to have an hour long conversation with you about your clinical trials experience. We'll do that another time. But I guess, what are some of the more pithy or valuable lessons that you learned recently in this approval process that you might feel compelled to share with another biotech founder or CEO who is, maybe on the cusp of one, hasn't experienced one,
Yeah.
you know.
Um, so I think one, it will take longer than you think.
Okay.
Particularly if you haven't experienced it, it is almost certain to take longer than you think. And it will require substantially more resource than you anticipate. And particularly if you come from a large pharma, that might not be obvious because they have large departments and groups that do this stuff, and those resources are available. Whereas with a small company, you have to be explicit about either having them or accessing them, and it's substantial. So I used to say that something like a quarter of the company during the BLA was pretty much dedicated to getting that BLA. So that's 100 and something people for the course of 18 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. I think secondly, and this I think people will debate because I think there's always diversity of opinion on this, but there is a time and a place to have scientific debate with the agency and to try to drive for the best possible answer. I would suggest that time and place is not while you're trying to get a product approved. When you're trying to get product approved, first part is, okay, let me understand really what the agency wants and make sure that those are well thought through. And then the last piece of that, which goes on for decent amount of time of writing and then engagement with the agency, is delivering that, not arguing about it, not suggesting that it should be something different. Just, okay, how do I deliver what the agency has told me that they need, particularly when they've told you repeatedly, and particularly where it might not be what you want to hear. You might think you have a better answer, but actually the answer is consistent with the agency's role. And so I think there's a lot of biotech companies, and I certainly saw a lot when I was in BD, who would say, hey, yes, the agency asked for this, but we're going to do this instead. And then they're surprised when the agency sends them a letter saying, we're not approving your product because we asked you to do this and you didn't. Now, that's obviously subject to nuance. I'm not suggesting the agency is omniscient, but in that process of approval, they are omnipotent. And so, whilst you can discuss and make sure that you are aligned on what you want to have, at the end of the day, your job is to deliver that and to get that product approved. Since that, for most companies, is the most important thing you're doing at that point in time.
Yeah. Incredible. That's super thoughtful advice. Great response. Do you have time to just wrap it up with one more?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just I'm hoping we can wrap things up with a look ahead without saying anything forward looking that's going to get you in trouble. What's going on with the pipeline now post approval, and what's on the immediate horizon for Adrian Rawcliffe?
So post approval of T-cell, we're launching. We're rolling out into the ATCs. If you go onto the tcellra.com website, you'll see that there are 7 treatment centers accepting patients referrals at the moment. They're building that up to 30. So we've got a network across the country that will cover the patients with synovial sarcoma. These are the top sarcoma centers of excellence in the country. Behind T-cellra is lete-cel. Lete-cel is very similar to T-cellra, an engineered TCR T-cell therapy for soft tissue sarcomas. It's about 2 years from approval. It completed its pivotal trial, so we're moving forward with that to get that registered. And then we'll be able to commercialize that through exactly the same footprint that we've developed for the launch of TCELRA. So there's a lot of operational synergies there. We feel really good about that. And then behind that is a pipeline of products targeting things that are not sarcomas. User-cel is the most advanced. That's in a phase 2 study, could potentially be registrational, depends on data and timing, etc. For platinum-resistant ovarian cancer. Starting to get into those larger oncology markets where cell therapy, I think, should be able to really demonstrate the benefits of a one-off therapy that with hopefully transformative benefit in those broader tumor types. But all that to be proven. Long term, whole load of preclinical stuff moving into the clinic over the next 24 months as well. So I think integrated pipeline, TCELRA, the first product. We've got to do a good job with TCELRA because apart from anything else, as well as getting to the patients with TCELRA who desperately need it, I think it will also reflect on the opportunity in the rest of the pipeline if we are successfully able to commercialize TCELRA. So
yeah,
all eyes
very
on
exciting.
that.
Very exciting. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Adrian. You're, like I said, I really appreciate the sincerity and thoughtfulness in your responses to my questions. There's a ton of value here, I think, for our audience, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, fast hour, right?
Very. It flew past. Yeah.
We'll have to do it again soon. I'll be in touch with your people.
Love to. Cheers, man.
That's Adaptimmune CEO Adrian Rawcliffe. I'm Matt Pillar. You just listened to the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Life Science Connect, and we represent the entire community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biotech builders. You'll find in that community, including Bioprocess Online, Cell and Gene, Advancing RNA, Clinical Leader, Life Science Leader, Outsource Pharma, and more. If you like listening to the Business of Biotech, you might like watching the Business of Biotech even more. Go to the Listen and Watch tab at bioprocessonline.com and check that out. We drop every Monday, so we'll see you then. And thanks for listening.